Now we have a graphical workflow designer that allows us to basically compile and combine all of those business rules into a single interface. So here is an example of a somewhat of a simplistic business process here, but each of these items are referred to as states, and the states, or excuse me, they are referred to workflow statuses. But the interesting thing is, and you might think, and in this case they are, but each of these blocks represent a status. Well, that's not necessarily the case always. There may be situations where you need to have a workflow that's not dependent so much on the status as another value. Some organizations I've worked with in the past, they might go, whether we agree or disagree on this, these are just things I've seen, but we might see an organization where they start off with a record being a low impact, and then as it moves along, that impact level increases in an attempt to make to speed things up and get to a point of resolution. So my point is that you could define a workflow on any number of fields within the item. In this case, we're purely looking at different statuses. So the idea is that when the record is created, the first status that's going to be registered is request, right? From the request, we can then enter into an approval process. Well, if we look here at the request, a couple of things. Because this is the entry point to approval, we can identify, one, the approvers that are associated with this approval process. And if I want to add or remove individuals, maybe I want to add, for example, Stacy Jones here, and then remove others, we'd have that option, right? So I can assign those approvers to this process, and then from there, notice also that there are a number of business rules. So in the major status object, you'll notice the rules 5. So there are 5 business rules here. And here we can send email to contact on the request, request approval email. So if we look here, and we'll just go ahead and edit it right from here. Certainly we can create new rules, all of those types of things. But at this point, we're saying that we're going to vote, and the criteria is that the number of approved votes is greater to or equal to 1. Right now, if we want to make adjustments to that, and maybe we're not interested in the actual number of approvals that we need, but instead we might want to take an approval per vote percentage. So if 30% approve, or if 60% approve, whatever the scenario might be, we can do that, right? And then if you select these different field options, the conditions and value options also will dynamically change. So, for example, if we select approval vote is equal to, and then at that point we can use a percentage. Okay. So then the action is to, if that is approved, then we're going to set the value to the next approval state, right? So that's the logic behind the graphical workflow designer. We can continue without saving. We don't need to adjust that. And so once that has been approved, then from there it goes to an approved state. From there we can then begin the work. We might have this record be on hold for various reasons. If we're waiting on the customer, we can do that. And you'll also notice that rules have, as we transition from one status to another, we can have rules. So in this case, you'll notice that it's overlapped, but you'll notice that this, for example, is a yellow line connecting the in progress to on hold, and it goes back to in progress after being on hold for a certain amount of time. But the green indicates that we have a rule in that direction. So being that the arrow is green, so any time it's green pointing to the waiting for customer. So any time that a record goes from in progress to waiting for customer, we have a rule here. And if I just click on that object, we can see, and actually, with good naming conventions, we can see that we're sending an email to the contact, letting them know that basically we're waiting on you. Please, provide us some information back, and so that we can continue on with the workflow and the incident resolution process. But it's very easy to manipulate. For example, if I was going to go from waiting for, I don't want to do that, but from waiting for to, to completed, something along those lines, I can, draw the directional, logic, from one to another, and I can, adjust this so it's a little bit easier to read and navigate, that type of thing. So, I might have a rule that says if we're waiting for the customer for X number of days, automatically close this incident, right? Not that that would be a good practice, but it is something certainly that you'd be capable of defining within the graphical workflow designer. So in my mind, this again is one of the most impressive features within FootPrints version 12 is the fact that not only can you define very sophisticated, very complex processes, but more importantly, as an administrator, I have a means of designing them so that I understand what's going to occur, when it occurs, and all the logic in between. Okay, so we've got about 7 minutes left. Hopefully you've asked some questions, so let me actually check the Q&A, and actually I don't see any questions at the moment. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask those. Otherwise, I can maybe cover a couple of other things here. Also, it is important to note, so while we're waiting on some questions, I'm going to go back here to the service request, and you'll notice that I've got a couple of different workflow processes. It is important to note that a single record can be part of multiple workflow processes, okay? And that's not the case here. We have a workflow process defined for our generic and basic service request. Here we have another one defined for a server request. And one of the things that will determine whether a record enters that process or not is the defining criteria. So in our defining criteria, if I add new criteria here, I might select that the criterion will add our conditions. So what's the field that we want to evaluate? Here we might use something like the service, and then from here contains, equal to, begins with. So we might say contains, and then server. And then we'll go ahead and create that. And we can certainly create additional logic as well, so other criteria. So I did see a question that came up, so I'll read it as is. I don't know if everyone can see these or not, but I'm running FootPrints version 9. Can you do an upgrade from 11, or do I need to start with a new install? Okay, that's a fair question. It actually is, I would not call it an upgrade. An upgrade in my mind means I can just plug in a CD, or I can launch an executable and an upgrade the application automatically. So it would be a migration. Understand that FootPrints version 12 is a different platform. There's a number of significant data model changes that have occurred, as well as just the capabilities. So that would be a migration. And now, in order to do that migration, you'd have to at least upgrade to version 11 to use the migration utilities that BMC is developing. That's not quite ready yet. As I understand it, I think they're in the final stages of beta. But even without that, even if you weren't to use that, you could, certainly export the data from your version 9 system and bring that in. And, just as a general rule of thumb, what I suggest to customers is that anytime you're making a significant jump like this, especially where you're several versions behind, there's a lot of new functionality. And so to make the best of that, you might want to consider doing a clean installation of version 12. and only importing your, what I would refer to as foundation data, things like your categories, obviously your clients, making sure that they are coming into the address book, that type of thing. But to answer your question, RightStar does have the skill set, does have the ability to help you migrate from 9 to 12, whether or not it's indifferent if you want to bring that data forward or not. Start with a clean install. Probably the preferred method and the least costly for that would be to start clean. So hopefully that answers your question.